Good morning. Uh, Sorry for the disturbance yesterday. I couldn't take class because of some technical problem. So let me begin. So this series of webinars this week and next week is going to cover the complete portion of food safety and the regulations. This includes the regulations of India as well as international regulations. In the food analyst exam, the regulations, food laws, etc., actually account for about 40% of the um, syllabus. And you will see the weightage also for the foods laws and food regulations is much higher than the other components of the food analyst exam syllabus. So what I want to first do is to introduce you part by part to the Food Safety and Standards Act and the rules and regulations in India. So the first thing is, if we look at the timeline of legislation, when did food safety come into being in India? It was way back in 1899 when the provinces had their own food laws, and there were a lot of conflicts between the provinces. In 1943, in India, we had a central advisory board which brought in some uniformity throughout the country. But it was only after independence in 1954 that there was a legislation or there was a law, because you need to have a parliament. And in 1954, the Prevention of the Food Adulteration Act, commonly known as PFA 1954, was included in the list of acts. And since then, it has been the PFA rules. Many of you might still hear of the abbreviation PFA. So the act came into promulgation in 1954, and the rules which were framed under the act came into force in 1955. Now, for almost 50 years, we did not have any change other than some amendments. The act was still the Prevention of the Food Adulteration Act, and the major focus of the PFA was to prevent adulteration. But in 2006, the amendments were introduced for the first time, and the Food Safety and Standards Act came into being. So that was in 2006. In between, the harmonization of the food laws with Codex was continuing. In 2011, on August 5th, the FSS rules and regulations were framed, and they came into force, and there have been amendments introduced from time to time. So if you look at the previous food laws, that is when we had the Prevention of the Food Adulteration Act, we had a grid of different laws, and each commodity was governed by a different law. So if you see, we had the meat and food products order, we had the food products order, we had milk and milk products order, we had the Export Quality Control and Inspection Act, you have the APEDA, or the Agricultural Produce Grading Marketing Act. In addition to these, we had the Standards of Weight and Measures Act for packaged and other commodities, the vegetable oils, oil products, the edible oils packaging regulation in 1998, and the solvent extracted oil de-oiled meal and edible flour. In addition, we had the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Clean. These were the laws prior to 2006. So it was felt that instead of having this complicated system of laws, these 7 laws, which were shown with the asterisk here, were integrated and they were repealed, and we got the Food Safety and Standards Act. The Food Safety and Standards Act 2006, the FSS Rules and Regulations 2011. These rules and regulations cover the whole of India. Every food business operator in India must follow these rules and regulations. The Food Safety and Standards Act received the assent of the President of India on 23rd August 2006, and then it was published in the Gazette. The Act has been amended by the Food Safety and Standards Amendment 2008, which was replaced by the Food Safety and Standards Amendment Act 28 March 2008. So there are amendments to sections, and currently also the amendments to the current act have been put up for public comment, and after public opinion, the amendments will be published. Now, you need to understand what is the difference between an act and regulation, because the last time when I gave this webinar, people sent me mail asking me what is the difference. An act is actually a legislation which is passed by the parliament, and acts can only be amended by another act of the parliament. So what an act does is it only sets out the legal, very broad legal and policy and principles. So you have different sections in the act which cover different sections of food safety and quality. The current Food Safety Act, the Food Safety and Safety and Standards Act of India, actually centralizes or focuses on safety and quality, whereas the PFA Act actually focused on preventing adulteration. Here, the focus is more on giving safety and quality of the food. So now, what is a regulation or a rule? These regulations or rules are generally known as subsidiary legislation, and regulation and rules do not need to be passed by the Parliament Act, but they require to be published in the Government Gazette to be legal. So generally these rules are known as gazetted rules or gazetted regulations. They are generally the guidelines that dictate how the provisions of the Act must be applied and implemented. They also contain official forms that are required under the Act. So regulations can, just as the Act can only be amended by the Parliament, the regulations and rules can only be amended by being published in the Government Gazette. So if it's the legal statement, the regulations and rules are the legal statement of the law that you want, then it is the act that is required. If it is the implementation, then the regulation is required. And it is the regulations and rules that must be followed and will hold good in the court of law. So that is the difference between an act and a regulation. So what are the benefits of this new act? What it did is it unified all the 8 laws and harmonized them so that they all come under one umbrella. The rules and regulations were aligned with the international regulations, especially Codex and other countries. The standards that have been set are science-based standards, as you will see, that all the decisions are taken by scientists who have got experience, years of experience on these, and they form members of the scientific panel and scientific committee. There has been more clarity and uniformity on novel field, and also it has helped to curb malpractices. That means adulteration and the contamination of food. So the benefits of the Act are that it boosts both domestic as well as the international consumer confidence. And actually, if you look, some of our regulations are much stricter or of a higher stringency than that of other countries. So now let us see what is the Act and who comes under the Act, what is covered under the Act. So under the Act, food is completely covered. So what is food? The definition has been given in the Act. It means any substance, whether it is processed, partially processed, or unprocessed, which is intended for human consumption. This also includes primary food, genetically modified or engineered food. It includes food that contains ingredients, infant food, packaged drinking water, and alcoholic drinks. This is a new entry under the definition food. Earlier, alcoholic drinks were not under the PFA, but now they come under FSSA, and we have a regulation for alcoholic drinks. Then chewing gum, any substance, as you're saying, including water used in food during its manufacture, preparation, or treatment. But it does not include animal feed. It does not include live animals unless they are prepared or processed and placed in the market for human consumption. This definition, which I am showing you here, is taken directly from the Act, word by word. So everything comes under food. So raw material, packagers, processing, transport of food, retail, pre-treatment, etc. So who comes under the Food Safety Act? Whether it is you and me, or is it only the food business operators? Every food business operator who deals with some form of food is under the Act. He has to follow the rules and regulations of the Food Safety and Standards Act. It could be this lady who is selling mango, a hawker. It could be a big grocery store. It could be a processing unit. It could be a milk bottling unit, a bakery, a restaurant. If your students, your canteens, your hostel mess, street food vendors, caterers, the prasada and things offered by temples, the food offered in gurudwaras, the food offered in hospital, on the airlines, railways, all these are covered under the Food Safety and Standards Act. So anything food that a human takes is covered. Now, who is not covered? Who is not covered? The only two who are not covered are the farmer and the fisherman. So the farmer, the produce in his field, as long as it is with him, or the fisherman, as long as the catch is with him, they are exempt. But once they sell their catch and this fish is found on the table in a market, it comes under the Food Safety and Standards Act, and all the rules and regulations apply to it. So also this, any grain in him, with him or his granary, is not liable for the Act. But once this grain goes to a supermarket or goes to a small store, it comes under the Food Safety and Standards Act. So the only two people who are exempt are the farmer and the fisherman. So in the Act, you need to read the Act. You can download the Act and rules and regulations from the FSSAI site, because that will be the most recent version. But you can also buy published versions, but they may not have all the amendments. So let us look at important definitions in the Act related to the food. I'm not going to go through the definitions, which are general definitions defining who is the CEO, who is the chairperson, members, etc. Let us see the definitions of words that are associated with food safety and quality. So this first definition we have seen. So the definition is there for food, and what you need to know is what is included under food and what is not included. Please remember, animal feed, live animals, unless they are prepared or processed, are not included under the definition of food. Plants prior to harvesting, drugs, medicinal products, cosmetics, narcotics, and psychotropic substances do not come under the ambit of food or the definition of food. Then, what does primary food mean? Primary food means an article of food being a produce of agriculture. So tomatoes, chilies, green peas, lemon, ginger. You have animal husbandry. So now here the fish is not in the hands of the fisherman, but it is now in the hands of the vendor. So it is the produce of agriculture, horticulture, animal husbandry, dairying, or aquaculture in its natural form. That means it has not been processed, resulting from growing or cultivation. This is known as primary food. As long as it is catching in the hands of a person, if you look at this definition, it says other than a farmer or fisherman. So this catch could be from the fisherman, but the fisherman is not liable, whereas the person standing here is liable. So also the farmer who grew these tomatoes or these green chilies is not liable, but this lady who is the hawker of this produce is liable for the and is under the act. Okay, so that is primary food. Then we have a definition for food business. So what is a food business? It is any undertaking, public or private, for profit or not. So as I said, this includes the canteen, the hostel mess, the airlines, the temple prasada, the food served free of cost, the food served in by caterers in weddings, etc. They all are considered as food business. So any undertaking, public or private, for profit or not, carrying out any of the activities related to manufacture, processing, packaging, storing, transportation, distribution, or import of food, including hotel, all are considered as a food business. So who is a food business operator or an FBO? He is the person who carries out this food business. So he's the business is owned by him, and he or she is responsible for ensuring compliance to this act, rules and regulations made under. So the owner of this tanker, which is transporting milk, is the food business operator. The owner of this street vendor is the food business operator. The person who runs your canteen or the person who runs your hostel mess is the food business operator. Then you have the definition for contaminants. It is very essential to understand the difference between a contaminant and an adulterant. So what is a contaminant? The definition says it means any substance, whether or not added to food, but which is present in such food as a result of production, including operations carried out in crop husbandry, animal husbandry or veterinary medicine, manufacture, processing, preparation, treatment, packing, packaging, etc. This does not include insect fragments, rodent hairs, and other extraneous matter. So what comes under contaminant? So under contaminants, we have the physical hazards such as stones, etc. then you could have contamination by microorganisms, so yeast, mold, bacteria. It could be the pesticide residues because the pesticide has been sprayed. It could be the heavy metals which are present because of the groundwater, or it could be even the veterinary drug residues because of the antibiotics used in animal husbandry. You could also have contaminants which are coming in from processing, such as the iron filings in tea leaves. You could have contaminants coming in from the leaching of the packaging material. It could come in from environmental contamination. So a contamination is something which is not intentionally added, but it is present in the food as a result of production. So contaminants in food can enter the food chain at any time of the food chain, and they include contaminants from the air, contaminants from packaging, as we say, contaminants from the cleaning material that you have used, contaminants from the supply chain because of storage, growth of mold, aflatoxin, etc. And it could be from the raw material handling. If the hygiene of the raw material handler is not correct, then this could be. It could also come in from the processing aids that you're using during food processing. So the contaminants which come in due to environmental influences are mainly those from the sea fish, which come in from whatever contaminants are present in the water. Contaminants again can come in because of the industrial wastes which are let into water bodies. The environmental contents could be the pesticide residues, which go into the ground and get into the produce. And this produce, you see, is eaten by the animal, so it can sink. So this is a continuous chain of the contamination due to environmental influences. So common contaminants which are found in food are acrylamide, aflatoxin, as I said, heavy metals, pesticide residues, dioxins, histamine, malachite green, plasticizers, bacterial toxins, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, PCBs, antibiotic and veterinary drug residues. We have the mycotoxins, ochratoxin, patulin, which come being from the grain which is infected by fungus, hydrogen cyanide, the thing deoxy, nononivol, which is a mycotoxin, and formalin is a contaminant which is found in food. So now let us look what is an adulterant. An adulterant means any material which is or could be employed for making the food unsafe or substandard or misbranded or containing extraneous matter. So generally an adulterant means any material which is intentionally added for economic purposes or to cover up the substandard quality of the food material. Extraneous matter, we have a definition, and in our standards you will see the definition sometimes varies with the commodity that is there. But however, the general definition for extraneous matter means any matter contained in an article of food which may be carried by the raw materials. So this could include, in the case of paddy, the husk, in case of the processing systems, some of the extraneous matter. But this extraneous matter is not added, but such matter does not render the article of food unsafe. So you see, when you have extraneous matter like grass or straw, it is not harmful, but and it is not unsafe, but however, it renders the food substandard. So Looking at the difference of adulterants and contaminants, these adulterants, as I said, are added for economic gain and technical benefits. You must have heard of melamine being added to milk to increase the nitrogen content so that you have an artificially increased level of protein. Adding sugar syrup to honey, this is very dominant, and predominantly honey is adulterated with sugar syrup, it is adulterated with rice syrup, etc. By diluting milk with water, water is an adulterant. By changing the color of spice powders by adding colored dyes. You might have heard of the Sudan dye problem in the pickles which are exported to the US to give a nice bright red color. Colored dyes which are used in the sweetmeats, all the Indian sweetmeats, you know, the green, yellow, pink burfis that you see. Changing the color when you use low quality turmeric thing to increase the color, add lead chromate, which is orange in color, adulterating black pepper with papaya seeds, saffron with maize trendles, which are colored, putting vanaspati into butter or ghee, adding tamarind seed powder to coffee powder, using spent tea leaves, adding cheaper meat to meat products. This is, you can see the famous case of where the burgers in the UK, instead of containing beef, contained horse meat. So contaminants, for example, iron filings in tea leaves. Iron filings are not deliberately added to tea leaves, but they come from the wear and tear of the equipment in the tea industry. Nickel is not deliberately added to vanaspati, but however, it is used as a catalyst for hydrogenating the vegetable oil to get vanaspati. Salmonella in pepper is a contaminant because it comes because in our country, we dry pepper in the backyard, we dry it in unhygienic conditions, and so therefore there could be salmonella. The lead in noodles, the sulfur dioxide which is added to retain the color of raisins. That sulfur dioxide is a processing aid. The antibiotic residues in honey and milk. These antibiotic residues are used to treat the brood of bees or the cow for the diseases, because bees can get fungal diseases and the whole beehive can be wiped out. So antibiotic, the residues or fungicides are sprayed. The cow is treated with antibiotics. You could get heavy metals from the water, especially if there are industry very close by, such as the paint industry and thing, because if you look at the water of our Ganges, it is contaminated with high levels of arsenic, and so therefore you see that most of our basmati rice contains arsenic levels. Pesticide residue is a contaminant, and the lubricants, that is the oils which are used in the manufacturing process, by mistake can enter into the food chain. So in India, these are the common foods that are prone to adulteration. So you have milk diluted with water, uh, detergent, sucrose is added, glucose is added, chalk, urea, caustic soda. Koya is adulterated with blotting paper, refined oil, and skim milk powder. Honey is adulterated with table sugar. Spices like turmeric powder to look brighter with maternal yellow. Vegetables and dal with maternal yellow. Black pepper, we have seen. Chili powder is adulterated with brick powder. Rice is adulterated with small stones which look exactly like rice to increase the weight. Coffee powder with roasted tamarind seed powder. Tomato sauces are adulterated with pumpkin pulp because pumpkin pulp is much cheaper than tomato. They are adulterated with non-edible colors. Tea leaves are adulterated with chemicals and additives and also color. And olive oil, the most common adulteration, comes from mixing it with cheaper and low grade oils. Although the adulterant may be a safe adulterant, it causes the food to become substandard, and sometimes it also causes the food to become unsafe. So extraneous matter is defined as, if you see in the case of wheat and grains, light filth, which says insect, rodent, and bird excreta; heavy filth, which is sand, stones, and clay; extraneous vegetable matter in several standard uh, for dates means stalks, pieces of shell, pits, fiber, and bean. In spices, condiments, you will see that the organic matter is defined as chaff, stems, and the straw, and the inorganic matter is defined as dust, dirt, stones, and lumps of earth. There are several techniques available to determine the extraneous matter. This could be just by simple sieving, or by sedimentation, or by flotation using different solvents, by which you can identify the extraneous matter. The definition for hazard. So we have seen the definition for contaminant and adulterant. Now we have a definition for hazard. It means a biological, chemical, or physical agent in or a condition of food with the potential to cause an adverse health effect. So we call this as a hazard or a biological hazard. For example, the toxins which are produced by the microorganisms and in food are biological hazards. Microorganisms in food, that is, the bacteria or the yeast and molds, are biological hazards because they can cause adverse health effects. Aflatoxin is a biological hazard. So, in the food hazards, we can divide the food hazards into biological, chemical, and physical hazards. In the biological, as I said, these include the bacteria, the yeast, molds, parasites, and viruses. In the physical hazards, it could include glass, wool, stones, insulation, plastic, and viruses. The reason why FSSAI has defined the hazard on everything is because when a food analyst gives the opinion, he has to be sure when the hazard is unsafe, when the hazard is causing, when the contaminant or the adulterant is causing the food to be unsafe, or whether it is causing the food to be substandard. So in chemical hazards, we have a large number of hazards. We have the naturally occurring toxic substances, which are called as NOTs. They include the allergens, the mycotoxins, the mushroom toxins, phytohemagglutinin or lectins, and the alkaloids. We have gone through these when we talked about anti-nutritional factors. Then you have chemical hazards which come from agriculture and animal husbandry, which include pesticides, fertilizers, antibiotics, PCBs. You have metals and compounds. These include lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic. You have processing contaminants, which include the lubricants, the cleaning solutions that we use, the sanitizing solutions, coatings, paints, refrigerants, water, and other treatment chemicals which are used under, say, probably the HACCP to clean the manufacturing plant or the unit. Now coming to the definition of food additive. You must be familiar with this because under food chemistry, we had a webinar on food additives. FSSAI defines food additive as it means any substance which is not normally consumed as a food by itself or used as a typical ingredient of food, whether or not it has nutritive value, the intentional addition of which to the food. So this says food additives means any substance with the intentional addition of which to food for a technological purpose in the manufacture, processing, preparation, treatment, packaging, transport, or holding of such food, which may be reasonably expected to result directly or indirectly in it or its byproducts becoming a component of or otherwise affecting the characteristics of such food. But this does not include a contaminant or substances added to food for maintaining or improving nutritional qualities. A very large definition, but with experience and looking at the list given in CFTRI, in the FSSAI, you can find out what is a food additive. So then we have processing aids. The processing aid definition is not given, but I thought you need to know what is a processing aid. A processing aid means any substance or material, not including the apparatus or utensil, and not consumed as a food ingredient by itself, which is intentionally used in the processing of raw materials, foods, or its ingredients to fulfill a technological requirement, and it may result in its present. Examples of this are maybe enzymes to get more juice out of the orange or more juice out of the lime. It could use sulfur dioxide to prevent the browning of the raisins. It could be a processing aid which helps in peeling the fruit very easily so that it loosens the skin. So these are aids which are used to help the food manufacturer to ease his activity. Maybe it could be a flocculating agent to flocculate the unwanted compounds. So what is the difference between a processing aid and a food additive? The processing aid is not consumed as a food by itself. In most foods, the processing aid will be removed, but there might be just some carryover. A food additive, it is not normally consumed as a food in itself and not normally used as a characteristic ingredient of food. The processing aid is intentionally used for processing raw materials to fulfill a technological purpose, whereas a food additive is used for a technological purpose in the manufacture, processing, packaging, and storage of the transport. So here it is used in the raw material, and here it is used during manufacture. The processing aid may result in unintentional and technically unavoidable presence in the final product, but the food additive becomes directly or indirectly an ingredient of the food because it is added to the food. Here, the residues must not pose any health risk, and the food additive is regulated for different food categories. The processing aid need not be disclosed on the label, whereas in the food additive must be declared in the list of ingredients on the food label. So this is a major difference between the processing aid and a food additive. So then we have a definition for ingredient. It means any substance, including a food additive, which is used in the manufacture or preparation of the food and is present in the final product. All food additives added to manufacturing process become ingredients. So we should not confuse ourselves with the composition, that is ingredient versus composition. So here, if you look at the egg and the banana and you look at the ingredients, it has all the ingredients that or food additives that can be used in the manufacturing process, but actually in a real thing, these two are the composition. It includes what they contain. So now if we read the composition of the egg or the banana, we would think twice before we ate the banana. Because if you look at the banana contains tocopherols, phylloquinones, which are food additives. And If you look at the egg, it contains the colors which are there in the list of colors. So this is the composition. So an ingredient is different from the composition. So a label, the definition for the label means any tag, brand, mark, pictorial or other descriptive matter, written, printed, stenciled, marked, embossed. It's a graphic design, perforated, stamped, or impressed on the attached container. And we will go into detail when we have the webinar on labeling and advertisement and claims. The package has also been defined. It means a pre-packed box. It could be a box, bottle, casket, tin, a barrel, a case, a pouch, a receptacle, a sack, bag, or a wrapper, or such other things in which an article of food is packed. Sample means a sample of any article of food taken under the provisions of this act or any rules and regulations made thereunder. So all the definitions, that are there are given in the act. And then we come to three important definitions given in the act, and that is unsafe food, safe food, misbranded, and the substandard. Because as a food analyst, when you give your opinion, you have to be sure when you declare it unsafe and when you declare it as misbranded. So one of the definitions for unsafe food is it means an article of food whose nature, substance, or quality renders it injurious to health if it contains a poisonous or a deleterious substance. For example, datura seeds in wheat, or even the argemone seeds in mustard. It could be aflatoxin in the peanuts or aflatoxin in the milk powder. Second definition is if it contains filthy, putrid, rotten, decomposed, or diseased animal substances or vegetable substances. So if it has any rotten substance, it becomes unsafe. If it is processed unhygienically or the presence of any harmful substance. So here, if you see yeast and mold and the total plate count is very high, that means it is processed unhygienically. It can be unsafe by substitution of any inferior or cheaper substance. It can be unsafe when the addition of a substance directly or as ingredient is not permitted. It can also be unsafe when you abstract wholly or in part any of its constituents. For example, in milk, if you abstract the fat, although it is substandard, it can also be unsafe. If you have taken away something which is good from the food, is also considered unsafe. If it contains colored, flavored, powdered, or polished as to damage or conceal the article to make it appear better or of greater value, especially like adding rhodamine color to sweet potato, or adding the green color to capsicum, adding methanol yellow to low quality dal to make it look yellow. This is the definition. I mean, these are examples for this definition. If it contains any coloring matter or preservatives other than specified. So we will see, you have seen how we look at the additives. If the article is infected or infested with weevils, with insects and worms, it is unsafe. If it is kept under insanity conditions, it is unsafe. If it is misbranded or substandard or food containing extraneous matter. If it contains pesticides and other contaminants in excess of the regulation. Misbranded. This means an article of food if it is represented or is being sold under false, misleading claims on either label or advertisement. So when we look at the labeling regulations, there will be several examples of these misleading and false claims. By a name which belongs to another article of food, by selling vanaspati as ghee. So that is misbranded. Under the name of a fictitious individual or a company as a manufacturer or producer. So if you are not the manufacturer and use someone else's license and name, then it is misbranded. If the article is an imitation or substitute or resembles another article which deceives the consumer, it is considered as misbranded. So misbranded is also if it has misleading statement, if it has the wrong country of origin, especially in the imported food, if it contains any food or additives without declaration, that means if it contains an additive and found in the food but not in the list of ingredients, it is considered misbranded. If sold as food for special dietary use without following the regulatory concern, if it is incorrectly stated as a product which is not the actual one. One very good example of a misleading claim is the vegetable oils, which all tell you zero cholesterol. And it is an advertisement so that you will buy the oil. This advertisement is misleading because no vegetable oil can contain cholesterol. It is only oils of animal origin which contain cholesterol. So ghee will contain cholesterol. You cannot expect to get cholesterol in the plant oils, and all the vegetable oils are plant-based oils. So there is no question of cholesterol. So that is an advertising gimmick where, because when a patient goes to a doctor and he has a heart problem or his cholesterol levels are high, the way the doctor conveys it to the patient is that you have got cholesterol. Because they do not understand cardiovascular disease or the word atherosclerosis, which is caused by high levels of cholesterol. So therefore, this person thinks, oh, the doctor has says I have cholesterol. That means I should not eat any food containing cholesterol. So they assume now that the advertisement says zero cholesterol, there is no harm in using plenty of oil. But in actual, it is more harmful than the zero cholesterol. And now in the new advertisement and claims regulation, the regulations have come when the food manufacturer can use the word zero cholesterol. So the other example is when it says sugar free. Again, a diabetic patient, when he goes to the doctor tells him he has got diabetes, but he may not understand diabetes, but he understands if the doctor says you have got sugar, because most of the rural population, they all know only the words cholesterol and sugar. So when they see something which says no sugar or sugar free, they assume that there is no harm in consuming that product. These are all misleading claims, but now FSSAI has taken that into cognizance, and we have the 2018 rules for advertisement of claims and when they can use these specific words. Then we have substandard, which is an article of food shall be deemed to be substandard if it does not meet the specified standards but not so as to render the article of food as unsafe. So that finishes the definitions for in the Act. So now just let us look at the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, that is the main body which controls the food safety and standards. So if we look at the authority, it comes under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. The organizational chart shows that it is headed by a chairperson, and then you have a CEO, that is the Chief Executive Officer. Under the Chief Executive Officer, you have the FSSAI headquarters at New Delhi, and all the states, the state governments and the union territories also come under the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. In FSSAI, you have the chief scientific officer and you have several divisions which deal with the different aspects of the law. So there are divisions for standards, regulations, quality assurance, imports, licensing and registration, codex, etc. They have regional offices in the different directions of India. We have the northern, the southern in Chennai, western in Mumbai, eastern in Kolkata, and the northeastern Guwahati. And under these, we have under them, there is the authorized officer and the referral laboratories, and FSSAI notified laboratories come under the ambit of the FSSAI. The laboratories come under the ambit of the FSSAI New Delhi. These are independent laboratories belonging to different ministries and governments, but the work they carry out is the food safety and quality is under the ambit of FSSAI. In the case of the state governments, the CEO is the designated officer for the country, and in the state governments, each state government or union territory has got a food commissioner who's known as the state food safety commissioner, and under them, depending on the hierarchy in the different states, you have joint commissioners, joint directors. But as per FSSAI, under this hierarchy, there needs to be a designated officer and there needs to be a food safety officer. They must have the state food laboratory, which is headed by the chief food analyst or the food analyst. So these designations vary with the state by state. So this is the organizational chart for FSSAI. But if you look at the actual functioning of the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, the Authority of India's Food Safety and Standards Authority consists of the chairman, who's the chairperson, and there are 22 members which represent different ministries and sections such as food processing, the consumer affairs, the law ministry, etc. The chief executive officer is the commissioner of food safety for the country, and he falls directly under the authority, and he serves as the convener of the Food Safety and Standards Authority. We have a central advisory committee, which is chaired by the chief executive officer. This central advisory committee includes the food safety commissioners of all the states and union territories, plus there are three technical experts in the laboratory analysis. And then under the chief executive officer, all the food commissioners, as I say, and the designated officers and food safety officers fall under the CEO. Now, as I said, FSSAI now has science-based standards. So where is the science coming from? To make these standards and regulations, we have got scientific panels where there are members who are experts in these different fields of expertise. They are members who are present due to their individual expertise, not based on the institution.
We are currently improving an issue with your audio connection. Please stand by.
So the scientific panels have got different committees. You see They cover all aspects and all the food standards. There are experts in these committees. As I said, they are individual experts. They are nominated based on their expertise and not based on the institution they represent. So when any question is asked or any problem arises, any standard is to be made or any regulation is made, it is these committees, the scientific experts in these committees, who give their inputs and their expert advice. Now, all the decisions of the scientific panel are now put to the scientific committee, which comprises of 6 technical experts who have been nominated, plus the chairpersons of all these scientific panels. They deliberate on all the inputs, all the standards and the regulations, and they recommend to the Food Safety and Standards Authority to accept these standards or regulations. So no rule or standard is made overnight. Every rule is made after it is thoroughly debated, scientifically debated by the scientific panels and the scientific committee. So the structure you see in the hierarchy, you have the food safety, that is the Food Safety and Standards Authority. Under that, you have the Central Advisory Committee, where it is a cooperation between the center and the states. The scientific committee consists of heads of the scientific panel and 6 independent experts. They provide scientific opinion on multi-sectoral cross-cutting issues, and you have the scientific panels which have independent scientific experts to provide scientific opinions in the particular area of expertise. So some of the general provisions in the Act based on which the rules and regulations are made are the regulation about use of food additive or processing aid. What the Act says is no article of food shall contain any food additive or processing aid unless it is in accordance with the provisions of this Act. A processing aid means any substance or material not including apparatus. We have gone through this definition. So this is what the article says in the Act. That means you cannot add a food additive or processing aid unless it is there in the regulation. For contaminants, natural occurring toxic substances and heavy metals, in the Act says no article of food shall contain any contaminant, naturally occurring toxic substance or toxins or hormones or heavy metals in excess of such quantities as may be specified in the regulation. So when a limit is given, as you will see when we go through the standards, the level of these contaminants should not exceed what is given in the or specified in the regulation. So if it says color is allowed at 200 ppm, that is the maximum amount of color you can add. If you have added and the food product contains 220 ppm of color, then it is, you are going against the regulation, or you're becoming non-compliant. For example, in ice cream, color is allowed. So if you exceed the permissible limit, then you are non-compliant. Then you have for pesticides, veterinary drug residues, and antibiotic residues. No article of food shall contain insecticides or pesticide residues, veterinary drug residues, antibiotic residues, solvent residues, pharmacologically active substances, and microbiology counts in excess of such tolerance limit. So again here, if it says that salmonella should be absent in 25 grams, even if you find 1 CFU of salmonella, it is non-compliant to the regulation. And in the Act, it says no insecticide shall be used directly on an article of food except fumigants registered and approved under the Insecticide Act 1968. So if you look at the insecticide list also, the farmers are not allowed to use insecticides which are not registered in the Insecticide Act. The In the Act for genetically modified foods, organic foods, functional foods, and proprietary foods, the Act says, save as otherwise provided under this Act and regulations made thereunder, no one shall manufacture, distribute, sell, or import any novel food, genetically modified article of food, irradiated food, organic food, foods for special dietary uses, functional foods, nutraceuticals, health supplements, and such other articles of food which the central government may notify in this behalf. So now we have got regulations for the imported food, we have regulations for irradiated food, we have regulations for organic foods, we have the nutraceutical regulations which covers all these, we have the regulations for proprietary foods, and the regulations for genetically modified foods are in the pipeline and they will be soon available. So if you want to manufacture or sell any of this, you must abide by the regulations. For packaging and labeling, the Act says no person shall manufacture, distribute, sell, or expose for sale, or dispatch or deliver to any agent or broker for the purpose of sale any packaged fruits which are not marked and labeled in the manner as may be specified for the regulations. That means what the Act says is if any packaged food is sold, it must have a label, and the label must follow the packaging and labeling regulations of the food safety and standards, rules, and regulations. Also, it says the labels should not contain any statement or claim, device, or design which is false or misleading in any particular concerning the food products contained in the package, or concerning the quantity of the nutritive value, implying medicinal or therapeutic claims in relation to the place of origin of the said product. What this means is when you give the nutritional information on the label, or when you make a claim, when we talk about claims, you will understand it. All these claims have to be justified and they cannot mislead the consumer. The restriction on advertisement and prohibition as to unfair trade practices. It says no advertisement shall be made of any food which is misleading or deceiving or contravenes the Act. No person shall engage in any unfair trade practices for the purpose of promoting the sale, supply, and use of articles of food or adopt any unfair, deceptive practice, including the practice of making any statement. And now we have this new regulation for advertisement and claims, where even a third party, like the film stars who use to actually promote in the advertisement, such as the noodles or different food items, such as Amitabh Bachchan, who was there for Maggi noodles and for other food items, they are also now liable and punishable. And so that could be the reason that you do not see them in any food advertisements, because if they are found to be deceivable, they have to pay a fine of about rupees 10 lakhs. So this as a thing continuing from the previous slide. So they cannot make any statement, whether orally or in writing or by visible representation. For example, the TV advertisements or any flyers that falsely represents that the foods are of a particular standard, quality, quantity. You cannot make a false or a misleading representation concerning the need. It is like if you do not take this food, this is going to happen to you. Gives to public any guarantee of the efficacy. So you cannot have an advertisement saying that if you take this food, you will lose 10 kilograms. So all these advertisements, you might see them there, but now very strict regulations have been put forth. All imports of articles of food, anybody who imports an article of food into India has to follow this section of the Act. No person shall import into India any unsafe, misbranded, or substandard food or food containing extraneous matter. They cannot import any article of food, and if they want to import, the importer must have a license under the Act and must follow all the rules and regulations that are there for the indigenous food. So no person can import any article of food in contravention of any other provision. So that also means that any imported food that is coming into the country must follow all our quality standards, all our safety standards, and our labeling regulations. If you look at our labeling regulations, we are the only country who have got the veg symbol. That is, you put a green symbol or a red symbol to show it is non-veg. So most of the other countries do not have it, but prior to it coming into the market, they have to put the logo. Now, special responsibilities as to food safety. Who is responsible for what? So the responsibilities of the food business operator have been defined, and the food business operator is responsible for the food that he puts into the market, and he cannot manufacture, store, sell, or distribute any article which is unsafe, which is misbranded, which is substandard, or which contains extraneous matter. He cannot sell any food which is prohibited by the Food Authority and the central government. And also, he cannot sell or manufacture any food in contravention of any other provision of this Act. The responsibility of the food business operator, he has to employ, he cannot employ people who are suffering from infectious diseases, contagious or thing. So he has to maintain the health of the employees. He has to see that they undergo medical check, and if they are suffering or sick, they should not be working in the business. No food business operator can sell any article to any vendor unless he gives a receipt or he gives in writing that he is selling this to the vendor. Because as we have seen earlier, the vendor is responsible irrespective of whom he buys it. And we have, when any food which is unsafe in a batch, so if the analysis of, say, 2 packets of biscuits is picked up from a vendor and it is found to be either unsafe, misbranded, or it is mislabeled, then or it is substandard, then the whole batch, irrespective, whole batch or whole lot will be removed. So it is presumed that the whole batch is unsafe or substandard and must be removed from the shelf. So for this, we have a regulation called food recall. So what are the thing? That is the liability of the food business operator or the manufacturer. Now, what is the liability of the manufacturer, the packer, the wholesaler, the distributor, and the seller? The manufacturer or packer of an article of food shall be liable if the food does not meet the requirements of the Act. So you will be wondering why I'm saying manufacturer and food business operator. Many times there is a food business operator who gets his food manufactured by a third party. So that third party is the manufacturer. The food business operator himself can be a manufacturer, but he can also use a third party as a manufacturer. So the manufacturer or packer is responsible, and if the food does not meet that. The wholesaler or distributor, that is, we have the wholesale office, is liable if the food is supplied after the date of its expiry, if it is stored or supplied in violation of the safety instructions of the manufacturer, if the food is found to be unsafe or misbranded, or it is you cannot identify who the manufacturer is, if it is stored or handled and kept in unhygienic conditions against the law, or it is received by him knowing that it is unsafe. Okay. So the seller. So finally, now we have what is the liability of the manufacturer or packer, what is the liability of the wholesaler or the distributor. Now let us see what is the liability of the seller. The seller will be liable if he sells it after the date of expiry. So if you go to a grocery store and you find there are things which are are beyond their expiry date or best before use, you can take the seller to task. If they are handled or kept in unhygienic conditions, if they are misbranded, if they are unidentifiable of the manufacturer, and if he knows, when he is selling it, it is unsafe. So this is the liability of the seller. So if you look in a nutshell of our food regulatory system, we have the food laws, which and under the food laws, we have some which are compulsory or mandatory and some which are voluntary. So in the compulsory or mandatory are the rules, are the Food Safety and Standards Act 2006 and the rules 2011. So every food business operator and every food business must be according to the FSSAI. But there are some foods under the FSSAI which are mandated to follow BIS and ADMARC. So they must follow those rules. Although the BIS and ADMARC are voluntary, these standards are of a much higher level or more stringent than FSSAI, and we have several BIS standards, but some of the FSSAI foods have to have the BIS marking. So it is mandatory to have the BIS and AGMARC marking for certain foods. For example, for BIS, packaged drinking water must follow BIS standards, infant foods must follow BIS standards, and condensed milk and milk powders must follow bathing. In the case of AGMARC, we have AGMARC has to be, for blended oil, you should get an AGMARC certification. For ghee with lower butyrorefractometer reading, for fat spread, for the Cabiya callosal and honey, dew honey, they must have the AGMARC. So we have mandatory laws and we have voluntary if you want, but among the voluntary, there are some mandatory AGMARC and BIS specifications. So the next webinar will be at 4 o'clock today when I will talk about licensing and registration and enforcement.